Welcome to a special presentation, breaking news here on SportsHub.STL.com. I'm Bernie Miklasz. The great Mike Claiborne is with us from Busch Stadium. And Claibs, we all received the word of mouth and then confirmed some terrible, very sad news earlier today about the passing of Walt Jocketty, a historically great Cardinals general manager at the age of 74. And I'll let you start, man. You've been around covering Cardinals baseball for longer than just about anybody in this town. So give us some perspective and just your initial thoughts.
Well, when you look back at Cardinal history and the successful teams and eras, Walt Jocketty is going to be tied for first as far as the impact that he had, not only on winning, but just the whole aura of what Cardinal Nation is, what we call it now. He kind of created that. He was very involved locally in a lot of different things when he first got to St. Louis. Incredible baseball man. But Bernie, he was the guy who thought it was a good idea to get the alums, get the Hall of Famers involved with the team as far as spring training and just being around the ballpark more and getting them involved in the community activities and just a lot of other things that people wouldn't think twice about. But Walt was involved in that. Maybe one of the shrewdest baseball men that you'd ever know. And Bernie, you were around him enough where Walt could keep it close to the vest with anybody. And then you think about the deals that he made. Who would have thought you would have been able to get a Mark McGwire? Who would have thought you would have been able to find a guy like Jim Edmonds to come in and have a career he had in St. Louis? And think about Ken Bottenfield, who he traded for, who had a really good tour duty with St. Louis. And the fact he was able to get Tony La Russa here. So, I mean, there's so many things you can talk about with regard to his impact on this organization. And the unfortunate thing is, Bernie, a lot of those things of his fingerprints have started to be smudged away.
Yeah, you're right, Claibs. And looking back on this, and there was a time, I would say, maybe early in 2024, I wrote a column and I didn't want to just shoot my mouth off. I wanted to back it up with stuff, and say, hey, man, this is one of the great Cardinals of all time. He wasn't a player, but he's one of the great Cardinals of all time. And I think, he obviously deserves a spot in the Cardinals Hall of Fame. And then I went to explain why. And I tell you what, man, when I did the history of all the moves this guy made, it just blew me away. And like you, we were both around watching it in real time. But then when you look at the body of work, I'm almost even now like, you got to be kidding me. Yeah. One guy did all this stuff. Can I take a minute to run through some of this?
Go ahead. You know what? This is the thing I love about Bernie Miklasz, folks.
Yeah.
When he starts prospecting, he turns up more than gold in a lot of situations when he comes to him writing pieces. So go ahead, sir.
See, I wanted your permission, Godfather, and I got your blessing, so I'm good. But no, I mean, and I want everyone, please, not because I'm talking, but because of the information. Just please take this, just listen to this stuff. All right, here's a rundown of players who were procured by Walt Jocketty and the honors they received as Cardinals. All right, notable draft choices: Albert Pujols, Yadier Molina, Matt Morris, Jason Mott, J.D. Drew, Rick Ankiel, Skip Schumacher, John Jay, Daniel Descalso, Chris Duncan, Alan Craig, Dan Herron, Braden Looper, Colby Rasmus, Pete Cosma, Adam Ottavino, Jaime Garcia, Brad Thompson, Bud Smith, Randy Flores, on and on and on. Kyle McClellan, Brendan Ryan, Chris Perez. I mean, on and on and on. And remember, some of those guys, you say, well, why, does a guy like Bud Smith belong in this list? Yeah, he does, because they traded him for Scott Rowland. Then, all right, how about this, right? How about this? Notable players acquired through trades by Walt Jocketty. This one will blow you away. Adam Wainwright, Jim Edmonds, Scott Rowland, Mark McGwire, Edgar Renteria, Darryl Kyle, Larry Walker, Woody Williams, Jeff Weaver, who actually is one of the main reasons they won the World Series in 2006. Jason Marquis, who in 2004 was 15-7 for the National League pennant winner. Rafael Furcal, Joel Pinheiro, Ronnie Belliard, Mark Sweeney, Todd Stoudemire, Dennis Eckersley, Fernando Vena, Will Clark, Steve Klein, Dave Veers, Chuck Finley, Fernando Tatis Sr., Rick Honeycutt, David Bell, Ray King, Aaron Miles, Mark Mulder, Craig Paquette, Ryan Terrio, Royce Clayton, Mike Timlin, Ken Hill, on and on and on. Notable free agent signings. Again, the names just blow you away. Chris Carpenter, Jason Isringhausen, Jeff Suppan, David Eckstein, Mike Matheny, Andy Bennis, Tom Henke, Reggie Sanders, Ron Gant, Ryan Franklin, Pat Henkin, Delino DeShields, Julio Tavares, So Taguchi, Scott Spezio, Ryan Ludwig, Gary Gaetti, Tony Womack, Mark Rudzelanek, Juan Encarnacion, Josh Kenny, and then the late career Willie McGee came back to St. Louis because Walt Jocketty signed him. All right, Cooperstown Hall of Famers who were brought here by Jocketty. Let's start with the Hall of Fame manager, Tony La Russa, who was hired by Jocketty. The three Hall of Famers in Cooperstown who were obtained by Jocketty were Scott Rowland, Larry Walker, and Dennis Eckersley. And Jocketty era draft picks, Pujols and Molina certainly will be there. And, you know, we could even, you know, speculate that there might be more down the line. And for example, Dave Duncan is a Hall of Fame valuable guy in the history of this franchise. And he is in the Cardinals franchise Hall of Fame. But you could even say, if, you know, I'm talking about, they don't put pitching coaches in the Cooperstown, but Duncan wouldn't have been here without La Russa. And so Jocketty made that happen too. All right. Cardinals Hall of Famers acquired by Jocketty through trades, draft picks, or free agency. La Russa, Duncan, Jim Edmonds, Mark McGuire, Scott Rowland, Chris Carpenter, Matt Morris, Jason Isringhausen, Willie McGee. All-Stars, 18 Cardinals brought to this organization by Walt Jocketty were selected for the National League All-Star team a combined total of 48 times. I mean, I won't read all the names, but you probably can do it because I've read all the names before. Can you imagine that? 18 different All-Stars, right? One more thing, and then I'll shut up and we'll get into some of this stuff. Players who became Cardinals through Jocketty's efforts combined to win three National League MVP awards, a Cy Young Award, 30 Gold Gloves, 16 Silver Sluggers, Rookie of the Year, World Series MVP, 2 NLCS MVPs, 3 Roberto Clemente Awards, 2 Hank Aaron Awards, and not to mention or not to forget, TLR, Tony La Russa, won multiple Manager of the Year awards. And then there were so many other guys who got MVP votes and Cy Young votes. I mean, this is an extraordinary body of work by this man. I mean, it just blows you away to just sort of recap all that. Not to mention that, you know, 96, they get to the NLCS. They had a lull after that. But from 2000 through his final season in 2007 as the general manager, the Cardinals were like number 3 in winning percentage regular season, but they were number 2 or 3 in postseason wins. And they won more postseason games than any team in the National League. And then the other thing, you know, he lost his job, but they won the 2006 World Series. They don't win the 2011 World Series without Walt Jocketty's influence, because it was still there. It was still very strong. You know, all you got to do is just start with Pujols and Molina and go from there. There were Jocketty guys all over that team.
No, you're right. And, you know, his impact is, as I mentioned, it's waning now. But, man, he's had a blueprint that was incredible. Because, you know what, Bernie, he was the last, in my opinion, of the real baseball people. You know, he did everything. He was a scout. He was an assistant GM. He knew everything there was to know about the game, not in uniform. And he knew how to make a deal. And, you know, a lot of deals that he made, the other team got a good player in return. It wasn't like he was fleecing people. He was a guy who put other guys in good situations. And I think, and as we worked around him, he was accessible. He was truthful. He didn't have an air about him to the point where it was like, I have it and you don't. He was just a guy that you appreciated him understanding what your job was and trying to help you do your job the best way you could. And he could help you with that. And there's just so many glowing things about Walt we could talk about all day long. But I think you summed it up, man. That resume of players that has come through St. Louis and it's been part of that. And many of them still are involved in St. Louis baseball for one reason or another. Walt was instrumental in that. And I think the other thing, Bernie, Walt was about finding character people. You know, that list you mentioned, there weren't many bad apples in that huge list you mentioned. And Walt was very conscious of what that guy was going to look like in a Cardinal uniform on and off the field.
No doubt about it. And I also think to extend this, it's very much about Walt Jocketty because Walt Jocketty hired Tony La Russa, and I don't think TLR would have come here without Jocketty.
I
They had
agree.
worked right. They had worked together in Oakland, so there was a big time trust factor there. They know each other, and Tony knew he could count on Walt to work with the people downstairs, TLR, Duncan, everyone else, and that they would all be on the same page, and it would be one team, and then we'd be in it together. And they also, it's one thing Tony told me all the time, a lot of times, the great thing about their relationship is that they could really, really get down and argue about stuff. And, TLR, as I know, and most fans know too, TLR was constantly pushing for everything.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And he wasn't going to get everything he wanted. And he would go to Walt and he'd say, listen, we can get this guy. We need this left-handed bat. We can get this guy. Let's go get him. Let's go get him. Let's go. And Walt, so I'll think about it. And then Walt would say, no, Tony, it doesn't make sense. Here's why. And then La Russa would be ticked off. And then he'd say, okay, you're the boss, and then they'd have another conversation and TLR would say, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I know that you have our best interests at hearts, and I trust you 100%. And you know what? Even if we disagree or if I'm mad at you for a day, I love you and respect you, and we're still on the same team. And I mean, my point is the Jocketty La Russa GM manager relationship, people outside of St. Louis will say, well, you're getting carried away. No, I'm not. In modern times, this was one of the great general manager partnerships in baseball. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Just look at all of these players and just look at all of the awards and look at all the World Series and playoff appearances and National League pennants. That was an ideal team. It was an ideal team.
Yeah. No, it was. And you're right. Tony would always push just a little harder to get this guy, that guy. And Walt, in a lot of cases, found a way. You mentioned some of those guys who were near the end of their careers, but still had a contribution to make. You think about Will Clark or Larry Walker or Mark McGuire. There was Reggie Sanders is another guy. I mean, he was able to find guys who meshed with what the Cardinals wanted to be. They wanted to be competitive. They wanted to win. And Tony was the guy who was a driving force. But he had to go to Walt, and Walt found a way to get a lot of that done, man. And, it's almost a lost art in the game today. And Bernie, I don't even know if I can think of a GM who was able to pull off the things that Walt was able to pull off during his tour duty in St. Louis. It's harder to do, obviously, for a lot of different reasons.
Right.
But Walt found a way, and he always felt like he was going to be, his team was going to be better today than they were yesterday.
And the way Walt could coordinate everything.
Yeah.
And it even starts down at the player level. I mean, and of course, Walt knew, clubhouse is basically the manager's domain. He knows that, but Walt could always sense when a player needed something. Like Mike Matheny, for example, when they signed him as a free agent, and Mike Matheny struggled in spring training, and he got off to a slow start. He wasn't hitting at all, and he was feeling the pressure. Like Walt took him aside and said, look, we wanted you for a reason. You're going to be a great leader of this pitching staff. You're going to be exactly what we need. We're so excited to have you here. Don't you worry about anything. He put his arm around him, said, don't worry 30 seconds about anything. Everything's going to fall into place. And that kind of story, and of course, Matheny, won a couple, 2 or 3 Gold Gloves. And I mean, he was the starting catcher on some great teams, including 2004. And until a guy named Molina came along,
That changed the landscape a little bit, yeah.
But you know what? Even Mike Matheny benefited greatly.
Yeah,
because he was able to go cash in with the Giants, and this is a guy who was wondering if the Cardinals were going to cut him in spring training. So Walt had that manner about him. And Walt had, I know it went wrong at the end because of Jeff Luhnow, so I'm not going to scrub that from history because Walt did lose his job and it was because of an organizational divide. But for the longest time, I mean, Walt and Bill DeWitt were a tremendous partnership. GM owner. So then you had GM owner, great relationship. They're all on the same page. Then you have GM manager, all on the same page. And you have the general manager picking his spots where he thought it was really good for him to seek out a player who needed to hear a message, usually a message of encouragement.
Well, how about the Chris Carpenter situation? They signed Chris Carpenter as a free agent who was hurt. And they just said, you take the time off to get yourself ready to go. Don't worry about this season. We're gonna carry you anyway.
Right.
And Chris Carpenter ended up being one of the best pitchers of his era in a Cardinal uniform. But that's who Walt was, man. Walt had a sense of seeing through people and seeing what that next page looked like with an individual, whether it was their character or whether there was their confidence. It didn't make a difference. Once he found out what it was going to take in order to get you on board, he was going to do it. And as I go back to the character element, he found people that were good character people, which I think really helped him be able to progress in the manner that he did, because those guys were contagious. The traditions that they had with those teams was contagious, and guys looked forward to coming to St. Louis and playing because they knew they were going to play for a great manager, and they also knew the organization was in sound shape as far as them going out and getting better players to make sure they could win.
I got to say, I always own whatever I write or say. Right? You don't see me. I never wrote that. You know, I don't. That's so true of modern media. Oh, no,
yeah, I see it a lot.
What, me? No, I never said that. No, man. I figure I owe it to fans and even the people I write about to be totally honest and come clean when I screwed up. So I remember having a conversation with Jocketty. It was in the summer of these years run together. It was the summer that he signed Carpenter, who wasn't pitching, 2003, I guess, and he wasn't pitching. And Walt had said, well, we think we'll have him in the second half of the season, but we're hopeful. And of course, they didn't have him in the second half. So I wrote something, and it's like, look, I know Walt Jocketty was trying to do something here. He was taking a shot. But why would you sign a pitcher who's got a shoulder issue and a pitcher that just simply can't pitch? You know, like, what's the point of that? You could have signed some other guy out there to fill the rotation spot. And I went to Walt, and I actually printed that thing out, and I said, you remember when I wrote this? And I circled it, and he laughed. He said, well, I guess we got lucky. And I said, the hell you got lucky. You didn't get lucky. You know exactly what you're doing. It was worth investing a year in Chris Carpenter. Even if he didn't pitch, it was worth having him because you knew even if there was a 33, 45, 50% chance that he wouldn't pitch, it was still worth the minimal investment you made. But he laughed about that, and he was humble as could be. He said, look, that could have gone wrong. I said, well, with all due respect, be quiet, man. It worked out great. And I was the idiot ripping you for signing him. So, but he was humble. He didn't say, well, you writers, blah, blah, blah. No, just a class guy, guy.
Yeah, we you know what? It's unfortunate we didn't see him enough after he left St. Louis.
Right.
And I'd run into him from time to time at winter meetings, or when he was with Cincinnati, he always made it his business to come to St. Louis, and he'd come by the booth, and he loved Mike Shannon, and Walt would just sit in there in the booth with us and just chop it up, man. Just one of my favorite people to see, and I'm really gonna miss him. Not like you are, and a lot of people who really knew Walt. And ironically, Tony's in town, Barry Weinberg's in town, all that crew is in town for a wedding. And I'm sure we'll find us somewhere later tonight to have a good refreshment in honor of Walt Jocketty.
Well, Claves, I know you got a ball game to do for KMOX and the Cardinals radio network. So it was a pleasure and very meaningful to have you on with us, because I know I go back a long, long time, and I'm proud of that, but you go back longer than any of us among those who are still with us. And your institutional knowledge and perspective is valuable all times, but especially at a time like this.
Well, I appreciate you saying it, man. I've been blessed to be around. Hopefully I'll be around a little longer. But man, you and I got to get together and do something here soon. And chop it up a little bit, because I'm always thinking there's stories that I tell people, and I think about the people who would have been around, and you're the first person that comes to mind that we have to do a sit down and just go through different sports and just talk about those moments we had and had so much fun being in this business. And I can't wait to do it with you, man.
Claibs, love you, brother, as always.
Right,
and we'll talk soon. And I'm going to continue rolling here for a while. I'll let Hardball, that's my nickname from my boss, Dave Green, who created, I'm just laughing at that because I have him in my contacts as Hardball. And I go back a long way with Dave, who again founded SportsHubSTL.com. And I call him Hardball because we were negotiating a radio contract way back in time. And I told him, I said, well, I would need this to do that, and no problem, you got it. And I'm like, oh boy, damn, you really play some hardball, Dave, because like the first thing I asked, he said, sure, but no, I love him. But anyway, and by the way, and I want to just say this, I know it's self-serving in terms on behalf of this great team that Dave Green has set up at Sports Hub STL. But when I got the text from Dave Green this morning, as some others did, including Mike Claiborne, said, Walt Jocketty's passed, you probably have heard, and we really should do something because this is a really big deal. He was a very valuable, meaningful presence, a great leader of Cardinals baseball at one of the greatest times in this franchise history. And people will always associate Cardinals fans who were young, middle-aged, still with us now. Cardinals fans will always associate the greatness of that era with, I would say, first Tony La Russa, but Walt Jocketty's right there in terms of leadership. And again, TLR's not here unless Jocketty and him have already established a trusting, good working relationship in Oakland. But I look at it from the standpoint, and I'm really proud that we're doing this. And those of you watching live, please hit us up with question or comments, and I'll take some questions as long as they're relevant to this particular thing, because this is a very sad day. And listen, I knew that Walt Jocketty was in bad shape, and I'm not just saying this because we found out today that he had passed away. I had found myself after hearing that he was in pretty bad shape. And I heard about this like right after the start of the new year, 2025. I find myself, and maybe it's because when you get older, you think about people that you've met and known along the way and how special they were either in your career or your life or both. And so when men or women of a certain age get to that age, when they hear about someone in their same age demographic, someone that they had a common experience with, someone whose work, like Walt Jocketty's work, represented some of the most joyous times of their lives as Cardinals fans, you don't take it lightly. You don't take the information. Walt's in really bad shape. It's confidential, but he's in really bad shape. And you don't take that and say, oh, that's too bad. And then you forget about it in a day, and then you don't think about it, again for a long time. I'm telling you, man, if I had a Bible, I would swear on it. I thought about Walt Jocketty all the time. I wondered about how's he doing? Is there any hope? What is there anything any of us can do? And the thing of it is, I'm also weird in this way. For as big of a mouth as I have talking at a time like this, I'll run my mouth, as you know, if you watch my videos, and thank you for doing that. I tend to be really like almost shy when it comes to stuff privately. In other words, I don't think of, well, I hear Walt's doing bad, so I'm going to get in touch with him. I'm going to get in touch. It was the last thing. It would be the last thing on my list, because even though, yeah, he would have enjoyed hearing from anybody who cares about him, I was like, he's going through hell right now, and I'm sure his family is too. And I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy trying to text them and then text them again and text them again and text them again and all. I wanted to give him his peace at a difficult time. So I just thought the world of this guy. And it wasn't just his body of work, which is I went through. It was everything else. Just to see how easily he moved between different parts of his world, whether it be the owner of the franchise, whether it would be the scouts, whether it would be scouts who may have disagreed with him, Tony La Russa. They were friends, but in their jobs, they were both tough. And Tony La Russa respected Walt Jocketty so much is that, and I told the partial story when Mike Claiborne was in with us, he respected him so much. Tony La Russa would have his arguments because, like I said to Claibs, Tony was always pushing. We need this. This guy's available. Go get this. And Walt would look into it and just realize, the team on the other side's asking for way too much. And maybe Walt didn't have the same opinion of whether the player was as good as Tony thought or whatever. It's baseball. It's no big deal. And they would really get into arguments, and Tony would come back and they would debate some more, and Tony would be very, very aggressive. But every single time that happened, and I have used this story before, every single time that happened, there'd be a cooling off period, and Tony La Russa told me he would always get back in touch with Walt, even if he was mad at him for a couple of days or whatever. And he'd say, Walt, you're a great general manager, man. All the moves you made, it's ridiculous. All the great stuff you've done. And I know I push, man. I'm aggressive, but don't ever take it the wrong way. Walt, you're the boss. You get the final word. And you need to know with certainty, I respect that and I recognize that. Now, I'll challenge you on some stuff, but at the end of the day, Tony's told me this. The general manager says, no, we can't do it. Sorry. And Tony said, that's it. There's no more to talk about. He made the call, and that's his job, and I respect that. And listen, I'll be totally honest with you. That's one of the things that frustrates me about the way things are now here in Cardinal Nation, because I don't want to see, this isn't the day to start like saying, nasty things about people. So I'm not going to do it. But it wasn't just that the Cardinals found a way, like Jocketty drafting, Molina and Pujols. And by the way, John Mozeliak was actually coordinating the drafts at that time. So he played a role in a lot of these things. And I'm not going to shortchange him just because we're all down on him now. He got off to a really good start as the general manager after taking over for Jocketty. And then we're not here to talk about this. Then they started making a lot of mistakes and the thing went downhill, as we know. But anyway, the way baseball is now, all of the general managers, pardon me, they're now like chief baseball officers or they're president of something. They view the managers, for the most part, certainly not where Terry Francona manages or Bruce Bochy, maybe a couple of others. They view the manager as almost as if he's one of the players, and that like all players are expendable. They come and they go. They come and they go. And they treat them as if like they're not equals or near equals, that they're down on the list there. Like they're not, it's not their job to make the manager happy. The manager's got to make me happy. I'm the boss. You got to make me happy. And I don't want to hear any lip, and I don't want to hear any, you questioning me or challenging me or like, sort of picking confrontations. You're going to be out of here if that happens. It didn't used to be like that. And I'm not a hopeless old timer. I live in the modern world. I've adjusted to the modern world. I'm just saying, I love the time when there were strong managers, and they worked with strong, capable general managers. And if they were able to make the right decisions, those are the kind of teams that couldn't be beat. Oh, they could get beat. Those were the teams that were set up for a long run of really, really tremendous success. And now the relationship between the front office and the manager, it's like the front office is the mighty ruler. Do not question me. Do not challenge me. You work for me. You are fortunate to work for me. And here's a printout. We want you to do this. We would like you to do this, which means you better do it, right? And that was the greatest thing about this. Well, the Cardinals had so many great things. But that was one of the great things about Jocketty and La Russa together. And I know Tony La Russa is very, very, very sad today. And they were not insecure. They were not insecure in their own positions. They knew that working together would make everything stronger. If one guy thought he was above the other guy, or the guy that technically wasn't the boss, because Jocketty was the boss, but if the guy who didn't have the final say, then he starts to resent it. And all of a sudden there's these little fissures that, form in the relationship. and it starts to splinter, and then there's a divide, and then there's some animosity, and it just kind of seeps in and it grows. That's when things start to fall apart. And Walt Jocketty knew it, and Tony La Russa knew it, and that's why they worked so well together, even though they had their share of beefs. And the other thing is that I understood why Walt Jocketty lost his job. Okay, I do understand it. I'm not going to be a phony today. I love Walt Jocketty, and if you ask me, I would think because of his tremendous impact on the history of baseball, and I'm talking about Branch Rickey, because as the Cardinals general manager, first of all, he put together World Series teams, but also he was the father, the architect of the modern minor league system. There were no minor leagues. There was not a minor league system. He put a minor league system in place for the Cardinals, the great Branch Rickey, and the Cardinals had such a tremendous advantage because of that. They were ahead of everybody. They were the first. He would find players, and at every level, they would have great players, and they're moving up all the time, and they're moving up, and then they're on the major league team, and then they find somebody better. And it was just a nonstop flow of talent because there was no draft then. You scout players and you sign as many good ones as you can. He came up with the idea, well, we're going to have a minor league system. We're going to have coaches. We're going to have instructors. We're going to teach them. And yeah, we're going to teach them the Cardinal way, which was a thing once upon a time. And the Cardinals, because of that, the way they prospered. So in good conscience, I would have to say, no matter who we're talking about, the greatest general manager in the history of the St. Louis Cardinals is Branch Rickey because of that transformative thing he did that made the Cardinals the best team anywhere in any sport, really. And you have to give a tip of the cap to Bing Devine. But with all due respect to Bing Devine, who I also love very much, he was the general manager at 64. And, or maybe I get my years mixed up, and I apologize for that. But he was behind a couple of those World Series teams. But I have to say, other than Branch Rickey, and I think Branch Rickey is in a class all of his own because no one would be able to compare to what he did. There's a different time, a different place. I would say Jocketty's the second best general manager they ever had. And, if we recognize that, Branch Rickey's almost kind of like a supreme being, it's like you can't really put him in a pool to compare to other managers, general managers. But Jocketty would be second. And if you're second to Branch Rickey, you are one extraordinary general manager, right? I mean, you can think of all the history of the Cardinals and all that they've won, right? And even when they win, like I mentioned at Claibs, even when he was gone, they don't win the 2011 World Series without all the stuff that Walt Jocketty did to put that team together. I would even say they wouldn't have won the pennant in 2013, even though Jocketty's last year here was 2007. I don't think they would have won the National League pennant in 2013, among other things. Jocketty thought that one day, Mike Matheny would be a really good manager, and Walt Jocketty admired Mike Matheny so much. And there was still some of that Walt Jocketty influence on that 2013 team. And so it's, sometimes when a general manager leaves, you look at what he did when he was in his job and when he was in the office. And then when he leaves, usually there's a little bit of a bounce, like, the team will still win for a little while, right? But then the impact of that general manager wears off. And eventually it's almost as if, he's a person in the past and has influenced everything that's happened since then. Well, he did a nice job, but, he really hasn't influenced this team going forward because he's no longer the general manager. Walt Jocketty's influence lasted a very long time. And that tells you a lot about how great he was, because usually that influence disappears in a short time. So he was really, really good. And for people, and by the way, I'm not in any way saying there's people out there saying, well, it's easy to be a great general manager when you have La Russa and you have all these players. Yeah, except Jocketty was responsible for getting La Russa and Dave Duncan and all those players, right? But the thing about him though, so if you ever wonder about his baseball acumen, so to speak, we know all about what a great his vision for putting a team together. And with all due respects to what Claib said, because I would have to disagree with my dear friend Mike Claiborne, Walt Jocketty fleeced teams in trades. He gave up nothing for Mark McGwire, right? He gave up very little. He knew to sell high with Kent Bottenfield, who had a great year. The year before they traded him to Anaheim for Jim Edmonds. And the Angels were all excited. Well, Bottenfield won 18 games. Wow, this guy's coming new in his own. And the Cardinals, between us boys and girls, they never really liked Adam Kennedy. And if Adam, you hear about this, I'm sorry, man, but it's true. So they felt the Angels wanted him, and they felt, well, we just signed it. We just traded for Edgar Rennery. He's going to be our shortstop. We're fine. We can get Jim Edmonds, and we can sign him, and he'll stay here for a long time. He gave up nothing for Jim Edmonds. He gave up nothing for Mark McGwire. He got Daryl Kyle for nothing. He got. I wish I had my trade list in front of me, but my printer's broke. We can name. He gave up little for Edgar Renteria, who's one of the great underrated Cardinals of the modern times, and he should be in the Cardinals Hall of Fame. You just look at all of the trades that he made, the big ones. He didn't give up much. I mean, he just dominated the trades because he would zero in on teams that had players who were free agents going to be free agents after the season, and he knows that those players, the people that ran those teams, would want to quote get something for those players. So it was easier to make those kind of deals then. It's not as easy now. But I'll tell you another thing that made one of the reasons why Walt Jocketty was such a profoundly successful general manager and why he was able to make so many of those trades is because the other general managers, it wasn't a thing of like, well, yeah, I respect Walt. No, he was among all the other general managers. He was absolutely one of the most popular general managers in terms of how his colleagues around baseball thought about him. As Tony La Russa told me when we were talking about Walt, I can't remember when this was, maybe in the last year or so. And he said, you know how you really can make great trades, where you end up winning the trade. You want trades to help both teams, but if you want to win trades, the best way to go about it is to have a great relationship with the people that you're calling to make the trades. Like they need to know that they can trust you. They need to know you're telling the truth when it comes to saying, okay, we'll give you this guy and here's what we know. And then they ask questions. And then Tony said, Walt always would be truthful with them. He never tried to hide anything. So whenever they got a call from Walt Jocketty about exploring a trade, it got their attention because he was beloved in the industry and he had great trust. And it was easy to make trades that way too, because the people you're approaching thought you were a great guy and a great general manager, and you weren't out to kill someone to make the trade. Well, I got to win the trade big. And I have to tell you, since he left, it's not like that. It's not like that. That trust thing has been missing because I think the Cardinals, as time's gone on, it's like they feel they have to like conquer the other team making trades. And listen, in defense of John Mozeliak, they were able to do that with Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado. So I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but Walt could get things done in large part because he had so much respect, admiration, and affection, and a level of very high trust that maybe not all general managers in baseball at that time had. And so Walt was able to take advantage of it. Not take advantage of it by being a phony, but just being a really trustworthy, good guy. So, and if anyone thought about, Walt, he left St. Louis, he got fired. And I understand again why that happened, because Walt really had a hard time accepting Jeff Lunau's increased power in the organization after Bill DeWitt hired him in the early aughts. And the thing about it was Jeff Lunau did do a heck of a job when he set up a new way of scouting, drafting, and developing players. And he kept the Cardinals, even after he was gone. The Luno operation, his system just kept the Cardinals going and going and going. Good draft pick and pitchers who were developed. And they really lost that with Jeff Luno's in. So I'm not going to be a phony here. I'm not going to be a phony and say, well, that was a terrible thing Bill DeWitt did. Listen, that's going to happen. Bill DeWitt wanted to modernize the organization, and we can criticize that in retrospect. I understand why he did it, but I also understand that he was right, because Jeff Luno really did a phenomenal job. And the thing of it is, he would not have been able to do the phenomenal job unless he, Jeff Luno, had enough authority in the organization. Because how can you set it up in a way you know is going to work if you're going to get overruled all the time? And that was the friction between Walt and Jeff, because as Jeff Luno gained authority, Walt lost some authority, but more than that, people working under Walt lost authority. And it was very, 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 very hard for Walt to accept. And there was a lot of resentment, and I get it. He's not wrong. But I also know that if this sort of becomes an ongoing thing, and there's going to be like no end in sight, you have to do something to bring the organization back together, because the Cardinals were very, 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 very divided during that 2007 season. It was kind of a mess. So my point, and by no means is that meant as any kind of criticism of Walt Jocketty. I'll tell you again, I love that man, and I think he's the second greatest general manager they've ever had, next to Branch Rickey. But I also know, and Walt came to realize it too. You know, when there's a power struggle, you're not always going to win. And this was at the advent of where owners like Bill DeWitt were catching on. There's a better way, a more efficient way to do things. And no one can dispute the positive impact Luno did. But I understood why Walt had a hard time accepting it. Look, we won. We've been in the playoffs. We've made all these great trades. We won the World Series. We won the pennant in 2004, the World Series and pennant 2006. I get it. That's just one of those things. Sometimes it happens. But as the years went by, I'm going to tell you this. When Walt Jocketty, after St. Louis, went to Cincinnati, and I thought a lot of people might have been thinking, oh, what's he going to do there? They haven't been very successful. I didn't write down that stuff, but go look at it on Baseball Reference. Walt Jocketty did really, really well as the general manager of the Cincinnati Reds. And one of the things he told me is that, I asked him one time, I said, did the way it came to an end in St. Louis, do you have any regrets at all? Or is there something you would handle differently? And there were still some bruised feelings, but he was really, I really appreciated what he said. He said, looking back on it, I took it really way too personally, and like my pride kicked in, and I was kind of in the fighting frame of mind. And he said, you're not going to win those type of things. And he said that, he gets it now. He really, later on when he was in Cincinnati, he got it. And he said, looking back, and one of the things he did, and I read the story and I smiled when Walt Jocketty was still running the Reds. Well, first of all, he told me he made a concerted effort to make sure everyone felt important, and the people that were below him felt important, and even people like the managers and everyone else felt important. Like he never wanted to think he was better than anybody, or he never wanted to be viewed as haughty. He was like, well, this guy's like a dictator. And he just said, I never wanted to be that. I realized I needed to get people in, and people that had some new ideas, meaning like a Jeff Luno, right? And that there's plenty of room in an organization for different ideas, different philosophies, to have great discussions, and also searching for things that can help your team, whether it's in analytics, whatever you want to call it. He grew from the experience in St. Louis, and he incorporated a lot of that thinking in Cincinnati and did really, really well. And what I laughed about when I said I read a story and I laughed about it was there was a time Jocketty was still at full power in Cincinnati. He elevated a young executive to a huge position. And basically, this guy was almost on like equal footing with Walt. But that's because Walt wanted him to be on equal footing, because I think Walt was already looking at, the end of his time in Cincinnati, and he wanted to have the Reds in really good shape. So he didn't just elevate a junior assistant and just give him a little higher job. He basically brought him in the last year or two. Walt was the guy there. His partner was like a partner. They were like co-equals. He empowered him. He challenged him to tell Jocketty why maybe Walt was missing something. Maybe Walt was wrong about something. Let's talk it out. And so because of what happened in St. Louis at the end, in his next stop, Walt not only did well, but he really did well, like understanding power and how power can absolutely just kind of, a power struggle can poison an organization. He was not going to let that happen in Cincinnati. So anyway, I wanted to give you some personal remembrances. I wanted to give you some historical perspectives. Remember how bad the Cardinals were in 2006 at the end of the season? The final week looked like they were going to blow it. It really did. I'm not going to lie. I thought they were going to cough up the division title. It was really close. If Scott Spezio doesn't hit that triple on Saturday to beat Milwaukee, I think the Cardinals were in a lot of trouble. But the Astros lost. The Astros lost that night, and then the Cardinals were in good shape. But Walt, I'm down in the the cafeteria, for lack of a better term, before the game, having some coffee and Walt came by and he said, listen, I'm not hollering at you, Rhett, man. He says, but my gosh, the way the stuff you're writing, the stuff you're saying, you would think that we're done, and you're making it sound like it's the end of the world, and like we're doomed, and you're just being so dramatic. And I said, yeah, maybe I am, but that's what I feel. I feel a sense of doom. Your team's falling apart, and I don't see a lot of happy people in there. I mean, I think they're feeling it. And he said, well, they probably are, but we got the character, we got the manager, and we're going to get through this. And I said, I really hope you do, because I'd like to see you all actually win this thing, And so this is how classy Walt Jocketty was. Like I've told you about the story where he signed Chris Carpenter, and I was like, why'd you sign him? He can't even pitch. And I showed Jocketty what I wrote. And I said, smart guy writing this too. And, this was Walt's invitation to Walt to tell me, I told you so. He was the exact opposite. So when the Cardinals beat the Padres, and then they beat the Mets, and then they're in the World Series, and everyone thought they would lose. And I said to Jocketty, I said, what are you doing here? There was some big mouth in St. Louis that wrote that you had no chance. You were cooked, And again, he could have absolutely said something snotty. He was the exact opposite. He said, well, if you really want me to be truthful now, I was pretty worried. He said, I just had to vent at someone. So you were the guy. And I said, I get it, man. It's actually really cool the way that worked out. They won the World Series, right? So anyway, I love Walt Jocketty. I miss him. I've been thinking about him a lot. This news today jolted me, even though in all candor, I assumed that call was coming. I didn't. It was a matter of time. And I hope the Cardinals find a way to honor him in the way he deserves to be recognized. And I know it's almost game time. So I should, if those of you still watching this, I should get on out of here, and I will. But I hope the Cardinals find a way to truly honor Walt Jocketty in a way that isn't just a tribute before a game, or having, maybe a Walt Jocketty night or something. I think it's deeper than that. I wrote a column about how I thought he deserved to be in the St. Louis Cardinals Hall of Fame, and I've been kind of campaigning for that. And I just hope that day's coming. And I can tell you this, I can share this. Bill DeWitt and Walt Jocketty, they repaired their relationship along the way. And there was no hard feelings on either end. In fact, you notice Walt Jocketty would come back every time one of his guys that he brought to the organization got the red jacket as a Cardinals Hall of Famer. Walt was at every single one of those ceremonies. And, you know, if he wasn't at reasonable amount of peace with what happened at the end here, he wouldn't have come back, and Bill DeWitt would have felt uncomfortable. They patched it up. They were on good terms. That made me happy to find out about that from both of them. And I just hope that, you know, there's going to be a place for Walt. And I think there will be. And if that's going to be true, the only regret and sadness, of course, is that he won't be there to receive the honor and to savor it and treasure it, and just know that how important so many people that love the Cardinals during his time and loved his teams, knowing that they didn't forget him and they love him and they care about him, and they will always, always be thankful for what he did for Cardinals baseball. And with that, I will sign off. I've gone 50 minutes. You know me, once I get started, you might stop me a little, but you cannot contain me. So anyway, thank you for watching this. Put the word around with your fellow Cardinals fans, because of course this recording of this will be on Sports Hub STL forever, and they can access it at any time. So get the word out for us, and we appreciate it. That'll do it. Walt Jocketty, rest in peace. You are very much loved, sir. Very much loved by Cardinal Nation, and even by a lot of the sports writers and media that worked with you. Even though you got mad at us, we loved you, man, and respected you as highest level of respect you could get. So with that, finally, I'll say goodbye and thank you for watching our reaction to the really bad breaking news today about the passing of Walt Jocketty. You all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.